All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is a channel for educational purposes, and we focus on uh, out of the way subjects that you may know nothing about, but that I think are of vital importance. And today is video number 269 that we have done on the reciprocal system of theory, which is a theory of everything that was first arrived at by Dewey B. Larson. And he did his work from about 1930 until his death in exactly 1990. And the reciprocal system of theory briefly states that we live in a universe not made out of matter, not made out of energy, but made out of motion. And for Larson, motion is the relationship between space and time. That sets up a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. Motion is a fraction, and time or space is the numerator, and space or time is the denominator. It's a little bit like Larson uses the analogy of a box. Motion is the box, but if you have a box, you automatically have the inside of the box and the outside of the box. And space is like the inside of the box, and time is like the outside of the box. At least from our vantage point here. And, the more time you have, the less space you have. The more space you have, the less time you have. But in general, motion is a fraction. There are many, many different kinds of motion, including matter and energy. And they all can be represented exclusively by time and space. The easiest example is speed. Speed is space divided by time. The bicycle is moving 15 miles per hour. 15 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time. But all other kinds of scientific phenomena are also fractions with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator, with three caveats that Larson lists in his first fundamental postulate, which are that space and time are both coordinate, meaning that they both come in multiple dimensions, 3 or more dimensions, x, y, z coordinates. So we recognize that space generally has 3 or more coordinates, 3 or more dimensions, but we don't recognize that time generally has 3 or more dimensions. Now, space and time also, second caveat, have their scalar aspects, meaning that they flow or progress, but not in any particular direction. Scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude but has no particular direction. And you can think of that as like the flow or the progression of time. What Larson refers to as clock time. Time is always getting later and later and later and later, but in no particular direction, or really all directions. That is the flow of time, or the progression of time, or what Larson calls clock time. But there is also, and we're familiar with that concept, but there is also such a thing as clock space, which we're not as familiar with. Clock space, or the flow of space, the progression of space, is a scalar motion, a motion that occurs in no particular direction. And this you can envision by using a balloon and a magic marker putting dots on the balloon, and then blowing up the balloon. All of the dots are moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. And if you suck in the balloon, then all of the dots would be moving toward each other, but in no specific direction. And this was actually observed by the Hubble telescope, which observed that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from one another. That is the flow of space, or the progression of space. Space is always getting later and later and later and later. Okay, so that is what Larson calls clock space. Okay, so the first caveat is that we have coordinate space and coordinate time. And then the second caveat is that we have clock time and clock space. And then the third is what Larson calls the discrete unit postulate, meaning that time and space are not continuous. They come in chunks. There is a minimum unit of time and a minimum unit of space. And if you have less than that, then you do not have time and you do not have space. You either have one or you have none. You have to have at least one to have anything. And these units of time and space are very small, but they still exist. So if you have exactly one unit of space in 1 unit of time, then you have the speed of light. The speed of light is what Larson calls unit speed. 1/1 equals 1. So the speed of light is unit speed, and in the reciprocal system, as in all multiplicative systems, 1 is the center. So there is an entire universe that you can think of 1 as like the boundary. And there's half of the universe that is moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls this the cosmic sector. And this is where you have coordinate time and clock space. And then the more familiar material sector is the sector, the half of the universe that is moving slower than the speed of light. And this is where we have the familiar coordinate space and clock time. And this is the material sector, is the sector where all of the scientists have done all of their observations and measurements. And very few of the scientists know anything about the cosmic sector whatsoever. Einstein even wrote his dictum that nothing moves faster than the speed of light. He said that the speed of light was the speed limit of the universe. Larson's saying that it is the midpoint of the universe. Just like with a reciprocal system, 1 is the center. On the positive side, you have 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on. And on the negative end, you have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5. So that is a multiplicative system as opposed to like an additive system like the legacy scientists use, where 0 is at the center and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the positive end, and you have -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5 on the negative end. That is not what Larson is using. He's using a system with 1 at the center, what he calls unit speed in the case of speed, but then also unit space and unit time. So in the material sector, he has the region where everything is less than 1 unit of space. And as we said with the discrete unit postulate, if you have less than 1 unit of space, that means that you do not have space. You have to have a full unit before you have any. And so without a full unit of space, you don't have space, meaning that you only have time. So Larson refers to this as the time region. This is a small subset of the material sector. And this is where you have the phenomena of atomic dynamics and atomic physics and molecular activity is going on within the time region. And so too in the cosmic sector, if you have less than 1 unit of time, then you don't have time. You only have space. And Larson refers to that as the space region. And in the space region, you have phenomena that are related to what the scientists call antimatter, but Larson refers to it as cosmic matter. And so you basically have three major boundaries of this universe. You have the unit space boundary, you have the unit speed boundary in the center, and then you have the unit time boundary in the cosmic sector. And then he takes the first postulate, combines it with the second postulate, which basically says that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. And from those two postulates, he derived an entire theoretical universe. And that's what he spent his last 30 years working on, is deriving this theoretical universe, which you can hear me lay out in 15 videos back about 6-7 months ago. It's called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System. And it was a paper that Larson gave, and I read the paper over the course of 15 videos. So you can go through Larson's thought process of, okay, if this, then that. Okay, well, if we have this, then we have that. And one step at a time, I believe there's about 165 steps that Larson takes to derive this universe. And then that's where he started writing his books. So he wrote books on chemistry and physics and atomic physics and astronomy, astrophysics. But eventually he got around to writing some stuff on economics. And he also wrote some stuff on metaphysics, including psychology, religion, and philosophy. And then when he died in 1990, he had developed a small following. And some of the other people began to write articles as well. Some of them challenged some of the findings that Larson had made, and some of them were very convincing in their challenges. Larson admitted that he was subject to error. He said that the theory itself is correct, which is basically the first postulate. Whether I have applied the theory correctly is a different matter. But if I didn't, it will eventually become obvious that I didn't, and somebody will come along and correct it. And one of the main people that came along and corrected Larson's work after he died was Dr. Bruce Perret. And Dr. Perret eventually came up with what he called RS2, Reciprocal System 2, the reevaluation of the reciprocal system. And he wrote a lot of stuff. He really had about 3 websites dedicated to various aspects of his work and his revisions of Larson. One of them is a little bit more speculative than the others. When he wrote speculative work, he wrote under the pen name of Daniel Phoenix III. And so some of that was moving into subjects that I don't think Larson would have ever written about, no matter how long he lived. But, and we're reading one of those articles today, which is called Extra-Dimensional and Extraterrestrial Entities. And this paper here uses the reciprocal system as a basis and Perret had a fantastic understanding of the reciprocal system, but he also employs um, other things that he had in his toolbox. He had a great understanding of languages, mythology. Um, he was a big buff on science fiction and used many science fiction concepts. He was a huge dreamer, lucid dreamer, and he used a lot of the psychological Jungian concepts of dream interpretation. Um, and he used projective geometry rather than Euclidean geometry, contesting Larson on his second postulate, but really saying that projective geometry actually includes Euclidean geometry. So it wasn't a full correction; it was just an expansion in terms of the geometry. He used many other authors, a lot of authors from the 19th century, to flesh out his theories. But we have gotten to the point where he's talking about in this paper, because this is, I believe, the seventh episode on this paper. So if you want to go back to the beginning of the paper, go back 6 days and listen to all the videos that I've done since then. But the last time he started talking about the SMs, the Saurian men, as in dinosaurian, basically the Anunnaki, talked about in the Sumerian tablets and in a lot of Zecharia Sitchin's works, and that the Anunnaki, how to kind of deal with them, so he's looking at the various different aspects of extra dimensional and extraterrestrial entities. And we've gotten to a section here that's called Defense Against the Dark Arts. And rule number 1, you cannot defend against the unknown. Know thy enemy. This section on extraterrestrials has introduced the concept of telepathic ionization, which is one of Larson's concepts, the ionization level. Telepathic ionization as both a beneficial form of communication and a potentially hostile control situation. What has been explained is very rudimentary. Subtle forms of this mechanism are commonly known as subliminal programming, which is a prime marketing tool for products and services, as well as a tool of control by authoritarian figures. Subliminal means below your threshold of consciousness, so you react to it without actually being aware of it. It is based on the group mind response, not the social memory complex. If you do not realize you are being influenced, you cannot defend yourself against it. Now, just to clarify, he really says that the group mind is kind of like a second density thing. So this is, how animals or plants, they all are representatives of a certain species. And that whole species has a group mind. They think together. They think in terms of survival of the entire species. Now, with third density, we've moved into an individuation. So we're thinking in terms, we as members of the third density are thinking more in terms of individual survival. But then when we move into fourth density and beyond, I think, I don't know if this actually occurs in fourth density or if it's more like a sixth density thing. Then we develop what he calls a social memory complex, which is a bunch of individuals, but they they can think in terms of individuality, but they are basically like a whole planet with one mind. And this is a term that was originally used in the raw material, which is the channeled work that Perret and the reciprocal system has a big connection to. Even though Perret basically disavowed, the raw material comes in 5 books, and Perret was pretty suspicious of channeling in general, and he was also quite suspicious of psychedelic drug use, or really any kind of drug use, and he felt like the raw material, the only valid book of the raw material was the first book, and that the other 4 were not channeled works, that they were based more on taking drugs. And I think he probably had other objections as well. But anyway, Ra, the entity Ra, was basically a planet with one mind and referred to itself as a social memory complex. My friend Juan Landis actually, he called his hip hop group Social Memory Complex in the inspiration that was given to him, that name. I don't know if Juan is still out there, stage presence, but if so, hello. Now, back to the text. If you do not realize you are being influenced, you cannot defend against it. SMs use these techniques to bias your fight or flight mechanism to flee, where you will run right where they want you to go. Particularly if you are with a group and outnumber them, they make you scatter so you can be picked off singly. Upon sensing the impulse to run, an effective technique has been to use your conscious free will to override the impulse and stand your ground. That situation causes a kind of telepathic backfire. Since they were focusing on you to flee, you reflected it back, and now they have the impulse to flee. If you outnumber them, a sudden turnabout of "let's get 'em, boys," and there is a good possibility that they will turn tail and run. And they have tails to turn and run. Note well that I am not suggesting you attack a 12-foot tall, sharp-toothed lizard, but the unanticipated action will cause a moment of indecision that one can use to escape. And you really don't want to engage SMs if possible, Saurian men if possible. At least not unless you're at least P8 with some decent training from your friendly neighborhood Psy-Corps facility. Okay, now he's got a couple footnotes here that are relevant. The first, the spacemen or Saurian men, as described by the gypsies, those are the SMs, commonly referred to as reptilians, though they exhibit characteristics more of an amphibian, having fish-like tails, fin-like wings on their backs, and a horny skull, much like the Oannes. And the SMs are actually quite cowardly, which is why they operate behind the scenes using groups like the Cabal to do their dirty work. Okay, now rule number 2. Never forget your Hoffman lenses. We are a human society and have grown accustomed to human behavior and body language. Take the time to learn about body language and the societal norms of your region. There are extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional entities that can mimic human form using a variety of techniques. The most common of which are a psi-tri projection, a three-dimensional psychic image that is sent telepathically to those nearby that alters the impulses the brain receives through the optic nerve to give the appearance of something else, such as making a saurian appear human. Psi-tri is no longer used much because camera and video equipment cannot be influenced and will show what is really there. B, transmogrification, a chameleon-like ability that allows an entity to physically change their body structure to blend in with surroundings. Since the change is physical, this is the most difficult technique to detect. And C is holocam, short for holographic camouflage, a device used to place a false image around something using holographic technology. This works well for sight, cameras, and video, but is revealed by touch. The hologram has no atomic substance, so you cannot physically touch the image. Projections are usually very close to the shape and size of the actual structure to minimize this realization upon accidental contact. Holocam will also show up using infrared cameras because the heat pattern will not match the visible pattern. And then D is invisibility, of which there are three techniques that can make an entity invisible. One, a variation of psi-tri projection to remove the image altogether. This is much more difficult than altering a shape and usually only done by more advanced entities, but again will show up on cameras. 2, shifting to temporal displacement. Since structures in 3D time are out of phase with our illusion of reality, they cannot be observed and can still interact with space via force fields, but they can be detected by a magnometer. And then 3, shifting from 3D space to 3D counter space, also known as exospace, a region of space that has negative coordinates. Human perception only detects positive spatial displacement. There are things that go whoosh in the night. They can be heard but not seen. Okay, then we've got rule number 3. Intelligence controls instinct. When you lose it, you lose out. Do not be willfully ignorant. If you don't know something, make the attempt to learn it. If you can't figure it out or don't remember it, it will sit there in the back of your mind. If that information is needed in an emergency, it will rise up to the occasion. This applies not only to extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional encounters, but also to the process of human ascension. The more you know about how it works, the more your consciousness can utilize that information to accelerate your progress along the path. We know how electric and magnetic fields can be produced by inorganic substances. Life, being organic, also produces an analogous field that is generalized by the term bioenergy, also chi, prana, and a variety of other labels. People realize that life has intelligence, but never realize that bioenergy also has intelligence. You can train your energy just as you train your body. When you make use of intelligent energy, it can leap to your defense well before your physical body can even flinch. Just remember, there are two sides to the reciprocal coin for life units, 3D space and 3D time. When you begin to use the features of 3D time, such as bioenergy, you are essentially ascending yourself to life as an extra-dimensional being. In conclusion, even though this isn't the end of the paper, but I guess the end of the section. In conclusion, something Larson points out in Beyond Space and Time, his final book, which I've also read into the record here on this channel that you can look for. It took about 100 videos or so, but it's called Beyond Space and Time, is that anywhere life can exist, life does exist. There is quite a variety of life out there, and the life we see on Earth, on the surface, in the air, under the water, and in the ground is representative of about a quarter of what is out there. In other words, we ain't seen much yet. Our life forms here are limited to a very specific environmental range. As we move out into the galaxy, we are going to encounter entities that are far from our environmental expectations. But what is important is that many of them are just other peaceful explorers trying to make sense out of their lives, just like we are. Remember that we share more microcosmic dimensions than macrocosmic ones. So, though we may look very different on the outside, we are a lot alike on the inside. Okay, that's the end of that section. We'll take over tomorrow and go into the next section, which is called Ascension, the Tomorrow People. But thank you for tuning in today. I hope to see you back tomorrow. Have a great night.